1 year ago, I uploaded my first ever video to YouTube, and I can confidently say that this last year has been the most exciting and fulfilling I've ever had. None of this would have been possible without all of you guys watching this, so to you all, I just want to give my most sincere thanks. My first ever video was about the overworld themes of the console Zelda games, and I thought it would be appropriate on my 1 year anniversary to dive back into the Zelda franchise, so today we're going to talk about the idea of Motivic Transformations throughout the soundtrack of Link's Awakening, as requested by patron Alec Lindsay. I also want to thank patron Ethan DeVer for offering his transcriptions of the soundtrack to this game, which were much appreciated, so thank you guys. Alright, so Motivic Transformations involve taking a single musical idea and adapting it, whether gradually or not, to a new musical situation. This could involve evolving one motif into a thematically rich and consistent melody, or developing a whole musical section that effectively contrasts the original musical idea. Or, most commonly in game soundtracks, creating music that effectively scores the different events in a game while maintaining a consistent musical identity throughout the entire experience. In transforming a motif, you have to be aware of what makes a musical idea recognizable to a listener so that you know which elements of it you can mess with and when you can mess around with them. I think that the two main ways that we actually hear and characterize melodies are by their rhythm and their interval structures. This is what I mean by interval structures. The distance between any two notes in a given melody can be measured by an interval and a direction, such as a minor third up or a perfect fourth down. These intervals, all strung together, make a basic musical shape or contour or structure that we, consciously or not, use to identify or recognize musical figures. We know that this, as well as rhythm, is how we recognize musical figures because you can recognize that the minor Mario theme is still just the Mario theme in a minor key. Not to mention the fact that completely reharmonizing a melody doesn't interfere at all with your ability to recognize it as being the original melody. It's worth noting that rhythm plays basically an equal part in our ability to characterize and recognize a melody as the interval structure, and you can go a long ways changing one of these two factors without sacrificing musical intelligibility. But changing both aspects of a melody simultaneously too drastically might end up being too much for a listener to be able to make sense of. So, with that out of the way, let's take a look at the way Link's Awakening's soundtrack transforms the most famous Zelda motif. Link's Awakening's overworld theme should be very familiar to anyone who's ever played a Zelda game before, even though the piece does take some liberties here and there with the classic tune. Instead of the original's spooky diminished arpeggio section, we get a brand new B section that perfectly illustrates the kind of motivic development I want to talk about. The first bar is virtually the same as in the A section, only one octave higher and with a minor third instead of a major one to better fit the new harmony. Where the original melody continually uses the root and fifth of the key to climb higher and higher up, this variation descends deeper and deeper. In the second bar of the bridge, the opening interval of a fourth is expanded to a sixth, with the fall softened by this F natural to make an F triad shape. The scalar run upwards that we expect is then replaced with a backwards scalar run down, leading into the next bar. The third bar gives us this cool mirror image of our main motif. This time we get a fifth that jumps down to our tonic instead of the other way around. This subtle variation on the series' most famous musical motif is actually itself transformed to fit new situations all throughout the game. One of the more obscure ways the soundtrack does this is found in the shipwreck scene in the game's intro, where the music captures the intensity and dread that one would associate with confronting a storm at sea. The harmony tosses you wildly back and forth between parallel minor chords the way a bucking ship would toss you back and forth across its deck, and the choppy array of 5/8 and 4/8 time signatures evokes the movement of the perilous ocean waves. Musically, we're a far ways away from the heroic, adventurous tone typically associated with the main Zelda theme, but the melody works perfectly to fit this scene after just a few small alterations. For any melody, the opening interval is the most important in carving out a uniquely identifiable character, and the opening fifth leap down from 5 to 1 is completely intact in this musical variation. Where the Storm version diverges from the original idea is in the 16th note walk up back to the 5th, which bucks our feet out from under us by sliding up to the always tense and spooky flattened 5th. This is extra weird because the note very much clashes with the unsettling underlying harmony, acting as the major third over an E-flat minor chord. Weird. This is a pretty drastic departure from the original version of the motif, which was completely effective. But what we get right after this scene, as we watch Marin find Link's unconscious body washed up on the shore, is a perfect example of a motive transforming more gradually over a longer period of time. First, we hear the motif that will be transforming in its original form. Next, we hear the same melody transposed down a whole step to outline an A-flat chord. This goes along with the original main theme's descending harmony and shouldn't sound out of place to anyone familiar with Zelda music. The only other slight variation to the original motif is rhythmic. The first two notes are displaced by a beat. This establishes a new rhythmic idea of having a rest on the strong beat and the opening interval following afterwards. This rhythmic idea is evolved further by the next two bars, where the rhythm is compressed from quarter notes to eighth notes, a common compositional technique called rhythmic diminution. The expanded rest this process leaves in the middle of the bar is filled in with a response by the bass of the same descending fifth interval. This idea is repeated through the same 1 to flat 7 harmony before being repeated 1 octave higher, giving you a chance to get used to the changes made thus far to the original motif before we move on to the next and final step. As Link's body is discovered on the beach, we move on to the final stage of our motif's evolution. We keep the exact same rhythmic idea that was gradually introduced before, but now the melody is extended into a 2-bar phrase with the addition of the simple octave leap. This phrase is then stretched into 4 bars and reharmonized with this dreamy walk down from 4 to 1. Reharmonizing the melody notes from the strong and adventurous 5th and root to the more subtle and colorful 3rd and 7th of each chord completely changes the character of the melody, even though the basic interval structure remains completely the same. This completely new tone or feeling that's created without the melody losing its recognizability is a perfect example of exactly what I was talking about at the beginning of the video. This final evolved variation of the original motif is used a few times throughout the soundtrack and even becomes the basis for another song, the Sword Search theme, where it gets expanded into a more full melodic idea. Motivic transformation is definitely an idea I want to talk more about in future videos, but I think that'll have to do it for today. Thanks again to patrons Alec and Ethan, and thank all of you so much for watching and helping this channel to grow over the last year. Let's hope the next year is as good as the first. You can find me on Twitter at 8bit Music Theory and check out my Patreon page if you want to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.